All right, welcome back to Shoveler's Guide. We are in Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to start off a little different today. We're going to start off with some review. I want to make sure everybody remembers and we're all following along with this common thread that Matthew is kind of pulling through the whole gospel, starting in chapter 1 all the way to the end, is this idea of the kingdom of heaven. And if you remember chapter 1, it's famous because it starts off with this big, long genealogy of Jesus, and it's really kind of proving the credentials that Jesus is in the line of David and is qualified to be, in the kingly line there. It was really trying to prove his claim to the throne of earthly Israel. Now, of course, we know that his father, Joseph was his adopted father. His real father was God the Father. So it's a little bit of this like contrast. It's like, yes, through that legal adoption of Joseph, he does fit the requirement to be, have a claim to that throne of the King of David through his like blood lineage. But at the same time, he also has more of a claim to the throne because he's the son of the real Father, the true Father, the Father in heaven. We do see this kind of set forth here from chapter 1, those genealogies talking about like who's fit to be king on the throne of Israel. And it's like, you got the physical lineages, but Jesus is actually even more qualified than that because he's the king of heaven, not just the king of like some earthly kingdom. He's the king of heaven come to earth. That's chapter 1, birth of Jesus and the genealogies. Chapter 2, you got baby Jesus under threat from the current king of Israel, the earthly king of Israel, who is Herod, King Herod. And he's a butt. He is, bloodthirsty and proud. He kills a bunch of Israelites, and it kind of reminds us, Israelite children, babies under 2 years old. And it reminds us of Pharaoh back in the day who used to be over Israel. Israel was like enslaved under him, and Pharaoh was killing off the babies back then, the Israelite babies. So it's like Herod, who's the king of earthly Israel at that time, was acting a lot like the oppressor from back in the day, Pharaoh of Egypt, and it's intentional that Matthew's putting this there. So the true king, right, this king of the kingdom of heaven come to earth, the true king of Israel, right, has come, and he's humble, and he's a baby, and it's the total opposite of the king of physical Israel at that time, Herod, who is proud and bloodthirsty and just murderous. So you got this contrast, Matthew bringing that thread, kingdom of heaven, chapters 1, chapter 2. Chapter 3, Matthew's showing up with John the Baptist, who is the herald of the kingdom of heaven, like the forerunner, so to speak. He's showing up on the scene, and he's letting everybody know, hey, the kingdom of heaven's at hand, right? Repent. And also he's talking about, the king of this kingdom of heaven he's on his way right behind me. So y'all better get it together. So Matthew chapter 3 is all about that. The forerunner, the herald, like the royal herald, almost with like the trumpets. Here comes the king behind me. So get ready. That's chapter 3. Chapter 4, Jesus in the wilderness, the showdown between Jesus and the devil. And what's one of the main temptations that the devil is throwing at him there? He's saying, hey, do you see this whole kingdom? You see all the earth? This is under my authority currently. And if you would just kind of bow down and worship me, I would gladly give you the kingdom of the earth, basically. And you don't even have to go to that cross, Jesus. I'll totally give it to you. I'm just such a nice guy. Just go ahead and, bow down before me. It's the clash of the kingdoms, right? The clash of the kingdoms, the light and the dark. And not to say that the devil is Jesus's like counter equal or something, because the devil is a created creature, and Jesus, of course, has been around since the beginning, because he is the beginning. So there's really no comparison there, aside from the fact that we do see this clash of the kingdoms, and Jesus, of course, beats that temptation. Matthew chapter 5, we get into Sermon on the Mount, and what are the first words of the Sermon on the Mount? What does Jesus say? He says in verse 3 of Matthew chapter 5, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is what? The kingdom of heaven, because that thread is going right through, because it's intentional. Kingdom of heaven. Matthew chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 6, you got thy kingdom come, right, from the Lord's Prayer. Thread goes right through. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Chapter 7, finishing up with the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is talking about how in verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will even enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. So Jesus is still bringing forward that kingdom of heaven, talking about how to get into it. Again, contrasting the ways of the kingdom of earth, the earthly, even the Pharisees and how it's going. the way they portray their spirituality, which is all a bunch of hypocrisy according to Jesus. And he's bringing the true way, the way of the Father, the spirituality of the Father, the true kingdom of heaven, not the fake one, right? This fake kingdom on earth that's purporting to be, the kingdom of heaven, but Jesus is bringing the true thing. And it's just, that's what the Sermon on the Mount's all about. So chapter 8, where we were last week, I mentioned that Matthew, after coming down from the mountain, Jesus coming down from the mountain, Matthew portrays over Matthew chapter 8 and 9, a series of 10 specific miracles. Now there's a general miracle thrown in there as well, which could make it 11, but it's general. It just says, a bunch of people were healed. It doesn't say like 2 blind men or this demon possessed guy or the paralytic or the leper. It's a general one. We'll get to that in a second because there might be something behind that, but there's 10 specific ones, and it's broken up between Matthew chapter 8, 5, and Matthew chapter 9, 5. Now, if Jesus is Jewish and, it's all about this kingdom of heaven, they would be expecting, watching Jesus, that he would be kind of, going to the Jews. And what we see in Matthew chapter 8, he goes to very interesting people. Matthew has very interesting people being healed in chapter 8. I don't want to get too into it, but I'll just list them real quick. They have the unclean leper is the first one, totally unclean. Jesus, touches this undesirable castaway person and makes him clean again, right? The second one is a Roman centurion who is a Gentile, first of all, and he's the oppressor of Israel. He's like a captain, a centurion. He's over 100 Roman soldiers, and he is actively oppressing Israel. So the Jews hated this guy, and Jesus heals this guy's servant because he has great faith. So you got the unclean leper, you have the hated Roman oppressor, the Gentile. The third one is Peter's mother-in-law, who's a woman, right? A second-class citizen. So Matthew's being very intentional of who he's listing here. Who is Jesus going to here, right? Remember, his mission is to seek and heal, to preach the good news and stuff. So then why specifically are these kind of like questionable Gentile or unclean or women? Jesus is being shown here by Matthew to be attracting a certain kind of people and healing a certain kind of people that he wouldn't be even expected to heal. The kingdom of heaven has got maybe a larger circumference than some of the leaders of his day were comfortable with, especially obviously the Jewish leaders. Then in Matthew chapter 8, he does the wind and the waves. He commands over nature. And the last miracle in Matthew chapter 8 is, again, with Gentiles, because he casts demons out of these 2 guys. And where do they go? They go into pigs. But what did Jews think about pigs? They're unclean. They would never be pig farming, right? And Jews would typically not be anywhere near pigs. So Jesus seems like he heals a couple of Gentile guys, and he does, send them into pigs. So this whole chapter 8 is dealing with like kind of the upside down version of who he should be healing according to, the Jewish leaders of the day. He should have been going to like healthy, great, upstanding, righteous Jews that had it all together. And instead he's going to losers and unclean people and women and Gentiles, hated Gentiles and stuff. Interesting what Matthew is doing. But now you come to Matthew chapter 9, and suddenly, chapter 8, he's dealing with all these kind of castaways. Chapter 9, he's bringing in the Jews. so the other 5 healings here, for this 10 specific ones total, the other 5 here, it starts out with the paralytic. And, he's Jewish. And verse 1 of Matthew chapter 9, it tells us where he is. He says, Jesus stepped into a boat and he crossed over and came to his own town, where he was based out of at that time, which was Capernaum. So he's there, a bunch of Jews at this point, right? So, and right away in verse 2, some men brought to him a paralyzed man lying on a mat, and he saw their faith, and he said to the man, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." And it goes on, verse 3, some of the teachers of the law, Jews, right? So that's how you know where we are. They said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." And you find out that they're all up in arms because Jesus healed this paralyzed man on a Sabbath. And the Pharisees, the Jewish teachers, are just freaking out. They're not having it. And this is what Matthew's leading off chapter 9 with. So Jesus comes to the Jews and he starts healing some people, and they're furious. They're calling him a blasphemer. One of the things I love that he says here, he's like, you guys got to figure this out, man. Like, it's not the healthy who need a doctor. It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick is eventually what he says, because they give him a hard time, not just about healing the paralyzed man on a Sabbath, but they give him a hard time about hanging out with Matthew. This is where we get the call of Matthew, the writer of this gospel. You find a little bit about his story here. Matthew, the tax collector, and Matthew invites him over to dinner with all of his tax collector and loser friends, according to the Pharisees, and they give him a hard time. What the heck are you doing hanging out with these guys, Jesus? You should be courting us, trying to hang out with us. We're the righteous ones. We're the holy ones, right? What are you going with these dogs and losers for? What a terrible attitude they had, and that's why, these two kingdoms were always on this, collision course, because the Pharisees were the opposite of the kingdom of heaven, really. And in some crazy way, they were trying to represent it by being the spiritual leaders over the people. But Jesus ain't having it. He's basically coming back to take his people away from these, false prophets, these false leaders and these evil people. So the next people healed here in Matthew chapter 9, it's kind of interchangeable. Can't really tell who's first, because it comes up first with a synagogue leader comes to Jesus and is like, help, my child has just died. So this is maybe more like it, according to what the Pharisees wanted to see. They wanted to see maybe Jesus going to like these like righteous, like, officials or whatever, the synagogue. But this guy in particular, seems to have the faith and seems to be called to Jesus and seems to be desperate and looking for Jesus to help him. And he believes it. So he goes to Jesus and he has him come to heal his child and raise her from the dead. And at the same time, while he's going to this synagogue official's house, a woman comes up to him with an issue of blood. I get back to the women, and she's unclean because that's what, according to Leviticus, Old Testament Jewish law, if you had an issue of blood like that, you were considered unclean. So she comes and, because her faith, grabs a hold of his robe and gets cleansed, healed. And then right afterwards, Jesus does end up going to that synagogue official's house and raising that child from the dead. So that's 2 and 3 of the healings from this. And then 4 and 5, you get the blind men that are healed. And then you get the demon-possessed mute man who is also healed. And it does seem like all Jews, again, because right after that last one, the demon-possessed mute guy, then they start saying, this guy heals, this guy casts out demons by the power of the prince of demons. It's basically saying like, this guy's so demonic that he has power over demons, and he chooses to heal everybody and save lives and open eyes and love everybody. But we're gonna say this guy is is demon possessed because it's the only thing that we can think of that maybe we can say, because otherwise we're stuck face to face with this guy's pretty awesome. So I want to take a moment here real quick on the first healing that he does in chapter 9, the paralyzed man on the Sabbath. And as we read a second ago, verse 3, the teachers of the law, they watch him heal this guy on the Sabbath, and they start freaking out. This fellow broke the Sabbath, right? He's blaspheming. And then later on, they give him a hard time again because he's hanging out with Matthew and the tax collectors. And they're like, why is this guy, doing this stuff, hanging out with losers and breaking our Sabbath, right? Because you're not supposed to do anything at all on the Sabbath, according to these, righteous, quote unquote, Jewish leaders. So Jesus says, he does tell them, he says in verse 12, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And he goes on and he says, I want you guys in verse 13, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. So what with the paralyzed man on the Sabbath, which way did Jesus go here? Did he go with mercy? Of course he did mercy. This guy's been paralyzed for who knows how long, stuck in his body, unable to move, suffering, hopeless. And it's like what the Pharisees are saying is like, that's great and all, Jesus, but you needed to wait until the following day because, you broke God's law by healing a suffering man, on this Sabbath. And Jesus is like, you guys got this whole thing backwards. He says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Well, what were the Pharisees all about? They're all about sacrifice, right? They're all about the idea of like, oh, we need to tithe, like, we're weighing our garden herbs so that we can do like a tenth, a little tithe of each one of our garden herbs, and we're bringing those in, and we're so like concerned about, the sacrifice, and following that they're completely missing the point of the sacrifices in the first place, right? So God is saying, guys, figure it out. I desire mercy over sacrifice. And that paralyzed man on the Sabbath actually seems to possibly call back to mind, for me at least, the non-specific healing that I mentioned before that happens in chapter 8. It's actually chapter 8, 16. And it just says that when evening came, many who were demon-possessed were brought to him. And he drove out the spirits with a word and healed all the sick. So there's a bunch of people come to him. But when was it? When evening came. Yeah, and this was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took up our infirmities and he bore our diseases. But why that little detail there from verse 16? Verse 15, he was just with Peter's mother-in-law, so this is a clean transition. When evening came. So what people think happened, what commentators believe is going on here, is that evening was according to the Jews, your day began at sundown and then ended at the following sundown. So the Sabbath was actually something that they had to wait when it was over, was when the sun went down and certain stars were in the sky. And as soon as you could see those certain stars in the sky, that meant the Sabbath was over and you're cool. Like, you can go ahead and do your work or whatever that you need to do at that point. So the idea here is that these people, and what are they again? Let's read. They're demon possessed. People they're demon possessed, and there's people that are sick, and the idea is that their family members or they themselves are like, sitting in their houses during the daytime on the Sabbath, and they just are like waiting. They're like probably, so they've heard Jesus healing people. They know Jesus is in town. They're obviously like trusting that this Jesus could do something for them, or maybe do something for them, bring healing to their long suffering, help their parents or their children that are demon possessed or whatever that it is. So they're waiting in their houses. They're just waiting all day. It's probably like waiting for Christmas morning when you're a kid, and it's Christmas Eve, and it's like you're in bed and it's 8:00 at night and you are not falling asleep because you cannot stop thinking about Christmas morning and what you're going to get and what's going to happen. And you're up, for hours. At least I was when I was a kid, for hours, like waiting so excited for Christmas. These people are waiting to have their lives back, waiting to have their lives changed, waiting to never be the same again physically, because this man could touch and heal with a word. But they had to stinking wait until sundown because the Sabbath was on, and it was like, if you came out and it was still daytime and you went to Jesus, like, maybe those, righteous Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, are going to look down on you and call you a sinner because you're out walking around during the day, even though you're just trying to get healed. So very interesting, right? Very interesting that that this is the one miracle that is unspecific, right? A bunch of people come to him, demon possessed and sick, and they're looking for healing, but it seems to link together with the idea of it having been on a Sabbath. And these people felt like they actually had to wait until the Sabbath was over. They had to wait for their healing. It creates a very interesting little picture there. It's almost like Sabbath, which was created to be a blessing to man, was being wielded as a curse. Like, these people were almost stuck in prison